When the most feared gunslinger in Wyoming Territory rode back into his childhood town, he came face to face with the same bully who had tormented him 20 years ago, only this time. Bull Morrison made the fatal mistake of challenging a man whose reputation was built on lightning-fast draws and deadly accuracy. In mere seconds, the town's longtime tyrant found himself staring down the barrel of Sam's Colt, begging for the mercy he'd never shown others. But would Sam Hayes pull the trigger and become the very monster his tormentor had always claimed he was? The gunshot that would change everything was still 3 hours away when Samuel Hayes first saw the wooden sign that read, Cedar Falls, population 847. His horse's hooves kicked up small clouds of dust with each step down the main road. The summer heat of 1879 made everything shimmer like a dream that might disappear if you looked too hard. Sam pulled his hat lower over his eyes. 20 years had passed since he'd last seen this place. 20 years since he'd run away as a scared 15-year-old boy with bruises on his face and shame in his heart. Now he was back, and the leather gun belt around his waist told a different story than the one people remembered. The town looked smaller than his memories. The buildings seemed to lean against each other like old friends sharing secrets. The general store still had that crooked porch step that nobody ever fixed. Mrs. Patterson's flower boxes still hung from the second-floor windows, though the flowers were different now. Some things change, Sam thought. Some things don't. A dog barked somewhere behind the blacksmith shop. The sound made Sam's hand move toward his gun without thinking. Old habits. When you've spent years watching your back, your body never forgets to be ready. He forced his hand back to the reins and kept riding. The saloon door swung open as he passed. A man stumbled out, already drunk even though the sun was still high in the sky. The man squinted at Sam, trying to focus his eyes. "Hey," the drunk called out. "You look familiar. Do I know you?" Sam didn't answer. He'd learned that sometimes the best response was no response at all. The drunk shrugged and wandered back inside, probably already forgetting what he'd seen. Children played in the dusty street ahead. They were having a stick fight, pretending to be soldiers or cowboys or whatever heroes lived in their young imaginations. One boy was bigger than the others. He kept hitting the smaller kids harder than necessary, laughing when they cried. The sight made Sam's jaw tight. Some things really don't change. "That's not fair, Billy," one of the smaller boys shouted. "You're too big." "Life ain't fair, runt." Billy laughed, knocking the boy down with his stick. "Better learn that now." Sam stopped his horse. "Hey, kid." Billy looked up, still holding his stick like a weapon. "What do you want, mister? How about you pick on someone your own size?" "Like who?" Billy sneered. Sam dismounted slowly. He was a full-grown man, but he got down on one knee, so he was closer to the boy's height. "Like me." Billy's face went pale. He dropped his stick and ran toward his house without another word. The smaller children gathered around Sam, looking at him with wide, curious eyes. "Are you a real cowboy?" one little girl asked. Sam smiled. It felt strange on his face, like he was out of practice. "I suppose I am." "Do you have a gun?" "I do." "Are you gonna shoot Billy?" Sam's smile faded. "No, sweetheart. Real cowboys don't shoot kids, even mean ones." The children seemed disappointed by this news. They probably wanted more excitement in their small-town lives. Sam understood that feeling. He'd felt the same way once, back when he thought adventure was something that happened to other people in other places. He remounted his horse and continued down the street. The boarding house where his mother used to work came into view. Mrs. Martha still owned it, according to the letters he'd received over the years. She was probably the only person in town who'd be happy to see him. But first, he needed to stable his horse and get a drink. The heat was making his throat feel like sandpaper. The Silver Dollar Saloon looked the same as it always had, like a place where men went to forget their troubles or find new ones. Sam tied his horse to the hitching post and pushed through the swinging doors. The inside was dark and cool, a welcome relief from the burning sun. The bartender was new, a thin man with nervous eyes who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "What'll it be, stranger?" the bartender asked. "Whiskey. The good stuff." Coming right up, Sam took his drink to a corner table where he could watch the door. Another old habit. In his line of work, you never knew when trouble might walk in looking for you. He'd made enemies over the years. Men who remembered his face and held grudges like some people held family photos. The whiskey burned going down, but it was a good burn. It reminded him that he was alive, that he'd survived everything life had thrown at him so far. The scared boy who'd left this town was gone. In his place sat a man who'd learned how to fight, how to win, and most importantly, how to stay alive. Other customers began filtering into the saloon as the afternoon wore on. Ranchers finished with their work for the day. Store owners closing up shop. Men who looked like they'd been working hard since sunrise and wanted nothing more than a cold beer and some conversation. Sam listened to their talk without joining in. They complained about the weather, discussed cattle prices, shared gossip about who was courting whom. Normal small-town life, the kind he'd dreamed about during lonely nights on the trail. It seemed peaceful, safe, maybe even boring. Then he heard a name that made his blood turn cold. "Bull Morrison's been in a mood all week," one rancher was saying. "Beat up Jake Stevens yesterday for no good reason. Someone needs to do something about Bull," another man replied. "Sheriff won't touch him. Too scared. Can you blame him? Bull's killed 3 men that we know of. Maybe more." Sam's hand found his whiskey glass and gripped it tight. Bull Morrison, the name he'd hoped never to hear again. The reason he'd left Cedar Falls in the first place. The man who'd made his teenage years a living nightmare. "I heard Bull's been asking questions," a third voice added quietly. "About some gunslinger who might be coming to town. Someone from the old days." The saloon suddenly felt too small, too warm. Sam finished his whiskey in one gulp and stood up. He left money on the table and headed for the door, ignoring the curious looks from the other customers. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, beautiful and peaceful. But Sam knew that beauty could be deceiving. Storms often came with the prettiest sunsets. He untied his horse and led her toward the boarding house. Mrs. Martha would give him a room and probably a hot meal too. He needed to think, to plan. Bull Morrison was still in town, still causing trouble, still hurting people who couldn't fight back. Some things really don't change, Sam thought again. But maybe it was time they did. The wooden steps of Martha Caldwell's boarding house creaked under Sam's boots like they were announcing his arrival to the whole town. Before he could knock, the door swung open, revealing a woman whose hair had gone gray, but whose eyes still sparkled with the same kindness he remembered. "Samuel Hayes," Martha said softly, as if saying his name too loud might make him disappear. "I wondered when you'd come home." "Hello, Mrs. Martha." Sam removed his hat. "I was hoping you might have a room." "For you?" "Always." She stepped aside to let him in. "Though I have to warn you, news travels fast in a small town. By now, half of Cedar Falls knows you're here." The inside of the boarding house smelled like fresh bread and lavender soap. It was exactly how Sam remembered it, right down to the faded photograph of Martha's late husband hanging above the fireplace. This place had been a refuge during his childhood, one of the few spots where he'd felt safe. Martha led him upstairs to a corner room with a window overlooking the main street. "You can see most of the town from here," she said. "Might be useful, considering." "Considering what?" Martha's expression grew serious. "Bull Morrison's been telling anyone who'll listen that he's got unfinished business with you. Says he's been waiting 20 years to prove he's still the toughest man in Cedar Falls." Sam set his saddlebags on the bed. "Some men never grow up. This isn't about growing up, Samuel. Bull's gotten worse over the years. Meaner, more dangerous. He runs this town through fear, and the sheriff's too frightened to stop him." Through the window, Sam could see people going about their evening routines. Shopkeepers sweeping their porches, families heading home for dinner, children playing one last game before their mothers called them inside. It all looked so normal, so peaceful. But he knew that fear lived underneath the surface, invisible but real. "How many men has Bull killed?" Sam asked. "3 that everyone knows about. Maybe more that nobody talks about. The last one was just 6 months ago. A traveling salesman who made the mistake of standing up to Bull in the saloon. Bull claimed self-defense, and Sheriff Bradley believed him. Or pretended to." Sam nodded. He'd seen men like Bull before. Bullies who'd grown into killers, who used their reputation like a weapon to keep people quiet and afraid. They were dangerous because they had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Martha went to answer it, and Sam heard a young man's voice in the hallway. "Mrs. Caldwell, is it true that Sam Hayes is back in town? Why don't you ask him yourself, Jake?" Martha returned with a man who looked to be in his mid-20s, He was tall and lean, with honest eyes and a deputy's badge pinned to his shirt. There was something familiar about his face, though Sam couldn't place it immediately. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Jake Morrison. Deputy Jake Morrison." Morrison. The name hit Sam like a physical blow. "You're Bull's son." Jake's face reddened. "Yes, sir, I am. And I want you to know that I'm nothing like my father. I became a deputy because I wanted to protect people, not hurt them." Sam studied the young man carefully. Jake Morrison had his father's strong build but none of his meanness. His handshake was firm but not aggressive. His eyes met Sam's directly, without challenge or fear. "Your father and I have history," Sam said. "I know. He's told me the stories. His version, anyway." Jake paused, choosing his words carefully. "Mr. Hayes, I need to warn you. My father's been drinking all afternoon, working himself up. He's planning to confront you tonight. Let him come. You don't understand. He's not the same man who used to pick on kids behind the schoolhouse. He's killed people, Mr. Hayes. Good people who didn't deserve to die." Sam walked to the window and looked down at the street. The sun had set completely now, and lamplight flickered in windows across town. Somewhere out there, Bull Morrison was drinking and planning and building up his courage for a confrontation that had been 20 years in the making. "Jake," Sam said without turning around, "are you asking me to back down? I'm asking you to be smart. My father's fast with a gun, faster than most people think, and he fights dirty. He won't give you a fair chance if he can help it." Sam turned back to face Jake. The young deputy's concerns seemed genuine, which surprised him. Most sons would defend their fathers, no matter what. But Jake Morrison was different. He'd chosen his own path, even when that path led away from his family. "I appreciate the warning," Sam said, "but I didn't come back to Cedar Falls to hide from your father." "Then why did you come back?" It was a fair question, one that Sam had been asking himself for the past 3 days of hard riding. Why had he returned to a place that held so many bad memories? Why risk everything he'd built for himself just to walk down streets that had once been a battlefield? "I'm not sure yet," Sam admitted, "but I figure I'll know when the time comes." Jake nodded, though he didn't look satisfied with the answer. "Well, when that time comes, you should know that you've got at least one friend in this town." After Jake left, Martha brought Sam a plate of beef stew and fresh cornbread. They ate together in the boarding house's small dining room, talking quietly about the years that had passed. Martha told him about the people he'd known as a child, who had married who had moved away, who had died. It was the kind of conversation that happened in small towns everywhere, the gentle accounting of lives lived and lost. "Do you ever think about staying?" Martha asked as she cleared the dishes. "I'm a drifter, Mrs. Martha. It's what I do." "That's not what I asked." Sam smiled. Martha had always been direct, never one to dance around difficult subjects. "Sometimes I think about it. But men like me don't get to settle down. We've seen too much, done too much. We carry too much baggage." "Everyone carries baggage, Samuel. The question is whether you're going to let it weigh you down or teach you how to be stronger." Before Sam could respond, the sound of breaking glass came from somewhere outside, then shouting. Martha's face went pale. "That came from the saloon," she said. Sam was already reaching for his gun belt. "Sounds like Bull's ready to talk." "Samuel, wait." But he was already heading for the door. 20 years of running, of looking over his shoulder, of wondering what might have been different if he'd stayed and fought. Tonight, all of those questions would finally get their answers. The main street was empty except for a few brave souls peering out from behind curtains and doorways. Word had spread quickly. Everyone in Cedar Falls knew what was coming. They'd probably been expecting this moment since the day Sam Hayes rode back into town. The saloon doors hung crooked on their hinges, one of them barely attached after being slammed open too hard. Light and noise spilled out onto the wooden sidewalk. Sam could hear Bull's voice inside, loud and slurred with whiskey. "Where is he?" Bull was shouting. "Where's the famous Sam Hayes? Too scared to face me like a man?" Sam stepped into the doorway, his hand resting lightly on his gun. The saloon had gone completely quiet. Every eye was on him, waiting to see what would happen next. Bull Morrison stood in the center of the room, swaying slightly but still dangerous. 20 years had made him heavier, grayer, but no less mean. His eyes locked onto Sam's, with the intensity of a man who'd been waiting half his lifetime for this moment. Well, well, Bull said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. Look who finally decided to show his face. Sam's boot hit the dusty ground with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the silent street. Every person in Cedar Falls had stopped what they were doing. Mrs. Henderson froze while hanging laundry. Old Pete quit sweeping his store porch. Even the dogs had gone quiet. Bull Morrison's ugly laugh cut through the stillness like a rusty knife. Look at you, trying to act all tough now, but I remember when you wet yourself in front of the whole school. His voice got louder, making sure everyone could hear. Remember that, folks? Little Sammy Hayes, too scared to fight back. The words hit Sam like punches to his chest. He could feel his face getting hot, just like when he was 10 years old. But something was different now. His hands didn't shake. His knees didn't feel weak. 20 years of hard living had built something strong inside him. That was a long time ago, Sam said, his voice steady as stone. Bull spat a brown stream of tobacco juice that splattered near Sam's boots. Not so long that I can't still whip you like the dog you are. He rolled his shoulders, cracking his knuckles. Still got these. He held up fists the size of ham bones. Sam noticed how Bull's belly had grown soft over the years, how his movements were slower, how his eyes looked small and mean, like a pig's eyes. You've gotten old, Bull. Old? Bull's face turned red as a tomato. I'll show you old. His hand dropped toward his gun. What happened next would be talked about in Cedar Falls for the next 50 years. Sam's hand moved faster than a striking snake. His fingers wrapped around his gun handle, pulled it from the leather holder, and pointed it straight at Bull's chest. The whole thing took maybe 2 heartbeats, maybe less. Bull's gun was only halfway out of its holder when he found himself staring down the dark hole of Sam's barrel. His mouth fell open like a fish gasping for air. His gun clattered to the ground, forgotten. Sweet Jesus, someone whispered from across the street. Bull's hands went up slowly, shaking like leaves in a storm. Now hold on there, Sam. Hold on just a minute. His voice cracked like a boy's voice changing. We're just having some fun here. Just talking about old times. Sam kept the gun pointed right at Bull's heart. His finger rested on the trigger, light as a feather but steady as a rock. One tiny squeeze and Bull Morrison would be nothing but a bad memory. The big man who had ruled Cedar Falls through fear and fists was now trembling like a scared child. Sweat ran down his face even though the day wasn't that hot. A dark, wet spot appeared on the front of his pants. Please, Bull whispered. The word came out broken and desperate. Please don't shoot me, Sam. I got kids. I got a wife. You should have thought about that before you drew on me, Sam said. But even as he spoke, memories flooded back. Bull pushing him down in the schoolyard. Bull stealing his lunch money. Bull making every day a nightmare of fear and shame. The crowd had grown bigger. People came out of shops and houses to see what was happening. They formed a circle around the two men, but kept their distance. Everyone knew a gun could go off any second. Young Jake Morrison pushed through the crowd. Bull's own son, now wearing a deputy's badge. His face was pale as milk as he looked at his father begging for his life. Pa, Jake said quietly, what have you done? Bull's eyes darted to his son, then back to Sam's gun. Jake, boy, tell him I'm a changed man. Tell him I don't cause trouble no more. But Jake just shook his head slowly. His eyes were sad but not surprised. Can't do that, Pa. Everyone in town knows that ain't true. Sheriff Bradley moved closer, his own hand on his gun. But he didn't draw it. He could see that Sam was in control. Easy now, Sam. Easy does it. Sam's eyes never left Bull's face. He could see the fear there. The same fear Sam had lived with as a boy. The same terror that had followed him in his dreams for years. You made my life hell, Sam said, his voice quiet but clear. Every day for 3 years, you made me wish I was dead. Bull's knees started to shake. I was just a kid too, Sam. Kids do stupid things. I'm sorry. I'm real sorry. Sorry doesn't give me back those years, Sam replied. Sorry doesn't take away the nightmares. The gun felt heavy in Sam's hand. Heavy with the weight of all those years of pain. Heavy with the chance for revenge he'd dreamed about so many times. But as he looked at Bull's terrified face, something unexpected happened. The anger that had burned in his chest for 20 years started to cool. This wasn't the giant monster from his childhood memories. This was just a mean, scared man who had gotten old and soft. Bull's legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees in the dust. "Please, Sam, please, I'll leave town. I'll never bother nobody again. Just don't kill me." The great Bull Morrison, terror of Cedar Falls, was now crying like a baby in front of the whole town. The man who had made Sam's childhood a living hell was begging for mercy. And in that moment, Sam Hayes had to decide what kind of man he really was. Time seemed to stop in the dusty street of Cedar Falls. Sam could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears like a war drum. His finger trembled on the trigger, and 20 years of anger pressed down on that thin piece of metal. Bull Morrison knelt in the dirt, tears cutting clean tracks down his dusty cheeks. His whole body shook as he waited for death to come from the barrel of Sam's gun. "I got grandkids," he sobbed. "Little ones who ain't even walking yet." Sam felt something twist in his chest. He remembered being small and helpless, looking up at Bull's cruel face. Now Bull was the one looking up, just as scared and helpless as Sam had been all those years ago. "Get up," Sam said, his voice rough as sandpaper. Bull's eyes went wide with confusion. "What?" "I said get up. A man shouldn't beg on his knees." Slowly, Bull struggled to his feet. His legs wobbled like a newborn colt's. He kept his hands raised high, palms open and empty. The crowd pressed closer, sensing something important was about to happen. Sam could feel their eyes on him, waiting to see what he would do. Some faces showed fear. Others showed excitement, like they were watching a show. But one face stood out from the rest. A small woman with gray hair and kind eyes stood on the porch of the boarding house. Martha Caldwell had been his mother's best friend. She was the only person in Cedar Falls who had ever shown Sam kindness when he was young. Martha stepped forward, her voice gentle but strong. "Samuel," she said, "your mama always said you had a good heart. Don't let this man's evil poison what's good in you." Sam's eyes flicked to her face, then back to Bull. His mother had died when Sam was 15, just before he left town. She'd never lived to see what he became. Would she be proud of him now? Or would she be ashamed if he pulled that trigger? "He deserves it," Sam said, but his voice didn't sound as sure as before. "After what he did to me, after what he's done to others, maybe he does deserve it," Martha said, walking closer. "But you don't deserve to become a killer. Not over him." Bull's son Jake moved to stand beside Martha. The young deputy's face was tight with shame, but his voice was steady. "He's right about one thing, Mr. Hayes. My pa has hurt a lot of folks over the years, including me." Sam looked at Jake with surprise. "He hurt you too?" Jake's jaw clenched. "Every day of my life. With his fists when I was small, with his words when I got bigger, made me ashamed to carry his name." He paused, looking at his father with disgust. "But if you kill him, you'll be no better than he is." "That ain't true," Bull said quickly, hope creeping into his voice. "Sam's a good man, always was, even as a boy. I was the one who was rotten." "Shut up," Sam snapped. "Don't you dare try to act like you know me." Bull closed his mouth and nodded, tears still flowing. Sam's mind raced back to all the times Bull had cornered him. Behind the schoolhouse, where Bull would punch him in the stomach until he threw up. In the general store, where Bull would trip him and make him spill things. At the church social, where Bull had torn his only good shirt and made him look like a fool in front of everyone. But he also remembered other things. His mother reading to him at night, telling him that being strong didn't mean hurting others. It meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Sheriff Bradley spoke up from the edge of the crowd. "Sam, I know what this man did to you. The whole town knows. But if you pull that trigger, I'll have to arrest you for murder." "It wouldn't be murder," someone called out from the crowd. "It would be justice." "No," said another voice. "It would be revenge. And revenge ain't the same as justice." Sam felt the weight of every eye on him. Some people wanted him to pull the trigger. They were tired of Bull's bullying and cruelty. They wanted to see the big man get what was coming to him. But others, like Martha and Jake, wanted him to be better than that. They wanted him to prove that he was different from the man who had tormented him. Bull tried to speak again. "Sam, I know I can't take back what I done. I know sorry ain't enough, but I'm begging you. If not for me, then for my grandkids. They don't deserve to grow up without their grandpa." "I grew up without a father," Sam said coldly. "He died when I was 8. You made sure I grew up without friends too, or hope, or any reason to think life was worth living. I know, Bull whispered. I know I did, and I'll regret it till my dying day. Sam's hand started to shake, not from fear, but from the weight of the decision. It would be so easy to pull the trigger. One quick squeeze and all the pain, all the anger, all the nightmares would be over. But would they really? Or would killing Bull just create new nightmares? My mama used to say that holding on to anger is like holding a hot coal, Sam said slowly. You're the one who gets burned. Bull's eyes filled with desperate hope. Sam took a deep breath. The smell of dust and horse sweat and fear filled his nose. Around him, the town of Cedar Falls held its breath, waiting to see what kind of man Sam Hayes had become. Slowly, very slowly, Sam began to lower his gun. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the air like a ghost refusing to leave. Sam holstered his weapon and turned away from where Bull Morrison had disappeared, in a cloud of dust and shame. The crowd of townspeople stood frozen, their faces showing the same shock you'd see if lightning had struck twice in the same spot. Well, I'll be hanged, whispered old Pete from the barber shop, his scissors still clutched in his weathered hands. Nobody ever stood up to Bull like that. But Sam's attention had already moved to the porch of the boarding house, where a woman in a faded blue dress watched him with eyes that sparkled like morning dew. Martha Caldwell had been his mother's dearest friend back when the world seemed smaller and safer. She'd been the only adult who'd ever spoken kindly to him during those terrible years when Bull made his life a living nightmare. "Samuel Hayes," she called out, her voice carrying across the street like a warm breeze. "Come here, child." The word child made something tight in his chest loosen up. When was the last time anyone had called him that? When was the last time anyone had looked at him like he was more than just a gun for hire? He walked toward her, his spurs making soft music against the wooden boards. Martha had aged, her hair now silver where it used to be brown, but her smile remained exactly as he remembered, kind and understanding, like she could see right into a person's heart. "Your mother would have been so proud," Martha said, reaching out to touch his arm. "Not because you outdrew that bully, but because you chose mercy when you could have chosen revenge." Sam felt his throat tighten. She always said the hardest thing wasn't learning to fight, but learning when not to. Smart woman your mama was. Martha's eyes grew distant. "She used to sit right here on this porch, wondering if you'd ever come home. Said she'd light a candle every night until you did." Before Sam could respond, heavy footsteps echoed from the sheriff's office. Tom Bradley emerged, his tin star catching the afternoon sun like a signal mirror. The sheriff looked older than his 40-some years, his face marked by the kind of worry lines that came from trying to keep peace in a place where peace was always just one gunfight away from falling apart. "Sam," Sheriff Bradley said, extending his hand, "that was some shooting. Haven't seen anything like it since the Rangers came through here back in 1868. They shook hands, and Sam noticed how the sheriff's grip was firm but his fingers showed the slight tremor of a man who'd seen too much violence. "Just defending myself, Sheriff. Bull's been terrorizing this town for nigh on 15 years, Bradley continued. "Folks were too scared to stand up to him. His gang of no-goods has been stealing cattle, starting fights, making life miserable for decent people." Martha nodded grimly. "Just last month, they ran the Miller family out of town. Poor folks lost everything they'd worked for." Sam's jaw tightened. The more he heard, the more he realized that his childhood tormentor had grown into something far worse than just a schoolyard bully. Bull Morrison had become a cancer eating away at the heart of Cedar Falls. "There's something else," Sheriff Bradley said, glancing around to make sure nobody else was listening. "Word came in this morning from Laramie. The Garrett gang hit the First National Bank 2 days back, killed 3 people, including a woman and her young boy." The name Garrett sent ice water through Sam's veins. Iron Mike Garrett was a legend in these parts, but not the good kind. He was the sort of outlaw who left bodies in his wake like a wolf leaves scattered bones. "You think they're heading this way?" Sam asked. Bank clerk who survived said he heard them talking about Cedar Falls, something about meeting up with local contacts before heading south to Mexico. Sam's mind raced. Local contacts could mean anyone, but given what had just happened, it might mean Bull Morrison was more than just a bully. He might be part of something bigger and more dangerous. Martha's face had gone pale. "Sheriff, you don't think—" "I think we better prepare for trouble," Bradley interrupted. "Sam, I know you just got back, but this town could sure use a man with your skills." Sam looked around at the faces watching him. These people had known him as a scared, beaten-down boy. Now they were looking at him like he might be their salvation. The weight of their hope felt heavier than any gun he'd ever carried. "What about deputies?" Sam asked. Sheriff Bradley's expression darkened. "Lost my last deputy 3 weeks back. Young Jake Morrison. Bull's own son, if you can believe it. Boy, nothing like his father. But folks around here don't see past the name." "Morrison?" Sam's eyebrows rose. "Bull has a son? 25 years old. Decent as they come. Been trying to make up for his daddy's sins his whole life. Good with a gun. Better with his head. But the town council won't let me make him official deputy because of who his father is." Martha shook her head sadly. "That boy's been carrying his father's shame since he could walk. Works twice as hard as anyone else just to prove he's different." Sam felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. Not the hot, wild fury he'd felt facing Bull, but the cold, steady burn that came from seeing injustice. He knew exactly what it felt like to be judged for things beyond your control. "Where is he now?" Sam asked. "Probably at the livery stable," Bradley replied. "That's where he works when he's not helping me keep the peace." As if summoned by their conversation, a young man appeared around the corner, leading a limping horse. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and serious eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Despite his name, Jake Morrison looked nothing like his father. Where Bull was thick and brutal, Jake was quick and thoughtful. Jake noticed the crowd and the tension in the air immediately. His eyes found Sam, took in the tied-down gun, the confident stance, the way everyone was looking at the stranger with a mixture of respect and fear. "Trouble?" Jake asked Sheriff Bradley, his voice steady despite the worry in his eyes. "Could be," Bradley replied. "Jake, meet Sam Hayes. He just had words with your father." Jake's face went carefully blank. The same expression Sam recognized from his own mirror. The look of someone preparing for disappointment or judgment. "I see. And my father?" "Left town in a hurry," Sam said simply. Seemed to think his health might improve with a change of scenery. For just a moment, something that might have been relief flickered across Jake's features. Then he straightened his shoulders and met Sam's eyes directly. "My father's choices are his own, Mr. Hayes. They don't speak for me." Sam studied the young man's face and saw something he recognized. The determination of someone who'd spent his whole life fighting an uphill battle for respect. "I never thought they did." The simple acceptance in Sam's voice seemed to surprise Jake. He probably spent so many years defending himself against his father's reputation that he didn't quite know how to handle someone who judged him on his own merits. "Jake's been helping me keep the peace," Sheriff Bradley explained. "Unofficial-like, since the town won't approve his appointment. But he's got more sense and courage than most men twice his age." "Trouble's coming," Sam said to Jake. "The kind that'll test every man in this town. You interested in standing up to it?" Jake's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, sir." Martha smiled, her eyes twinkling with something that might have been mischief. "Looks like Cedar Falls is about to get interesting again." But none of them knew just how interesting things were about to become. Thunder rolled across the prairie like the footsteps of angry gods, though the sky remained clear as glass. Jake Morrison knew better. Those weren't storm clouds making that sound. He dropped the horseshoe he'd been shaping and grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the livery stable wall. "Riders coming fast," he called to Sam, who was checking his weapons on the porch of the sheriff's office. "Sounds like maybe 6 or 7 horses." Sam stood up slowly, his hand resting easy on his gun handle. The way he moved reminded Jake of a mountain cat, all controlled power and deadly patience. "You ready for this?" Jake's heart hammered against his ribs like a woodpecker on a dead tree, but his voice came out steady. "Ready as I'll ever be." The first rider appeared over the hill like a dark storm cloud, followed by 6 more men who looked like they'd crawled out of the devil's own nightmares. Their leader sat his horse like he owned the world, his black hat pulled low over eyes that gleamed with cruel intelligence. Iron Mike Garrett had arrived in Cedar Falls. Sheriff Bradley stepped out of his office, badge glinting in the late afternoon sun. "That's far enough," he called out, though his voice carried more hope than authority. Iron Mike laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Well, well, if it ain't Tom Bradley, still playing lawman in this dusty little hole." He spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Heard you might have something that belongs to me." "Don't know what you're talking about, Garrett," Bradley replied, but Jake could see the sweat beading on the older man's forehead despite the cooling air. My associate Bull Morrison was supposed to meet us here, Iron Mike continued, his eyes scanning the street like a hawk looking for mice. Funny thing is, he ain't nowhere to be found. Last anyone saw him, he was riding out of here like his tail was on fire. Sam stepped forward, moving with that same deadly grace Jake had noticed before. Bull decided to take a vacation, permanent-like. Iron Mike's attention focused on Sam like a rifle sight finding its target. And you would be? Sam Hayes. Recognition flickered in the outlaw's eyes. The gunfighter. Heard stories about you down in Arizona Territory. They say you're fast. Fast enough? We'll see about that. Iron Mike's hand moved closer to his weapon. See, Bull owed us money. A lot of money. And when a man disappears owing Iron Mike Garrett, well, someone's got to pay. Jake felt his mouth go dry. The whole town had gathered now, hiding behind windows and doorways, watching the confrontation unfold like it was some kind of deadly theater show. Miss Henderson clutched her two young children close. Old Pete had disappeared entirely, probably hiding under his barber chair. Bull's debts died with his reputation, Sam said calmly. Nothing here belongs to you. Everything here belongs to me now, Iron Mike snarled. This whole town's going to pay for what happened to my partner. That's when Jake noticed something that made his blood freeze. One of Iron Mike's men had circled around behind the general store. Another was moving toward the schoolhouse where Miss Emily taught the town's children. They weren't just here for Bull Morrison. They were planning something much worse. Sam, Jake said quietly, not taking his eyes off Iron Mike. They're surrounding us. Sam's jaw tightened almost invisibly. I see them. Sheriff Bradley must have noticed too, because his hand moved to his gun. But Jake could tell the older man was scared. Not cowardly scared, but the smart kind of scared that comes from knowing you're outgunned and outmanned. Tell you what, Iron Mike said, his voice taking on a false friendliness that fooled nobody. I'm feeling generous today. You give me everything in that bank, plus whatever Bull was supposed to pay us, and maybe I'll let this town keep standing. And if we refuse? Bradley asked. Iron Mike's smile was colder than a winter grave. Then Cedar Falls becomes a memory. The tension stretched tight as a violin string. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, could smell the fierce sweat of the townspeople, could feel the weight of his father's reputation pressing down on him like a stone. Then Martha Caldwell did something nobody expected. The elderly woman walked right out into the middle of the street, her chin held high and her eyes blazing with fury. You listen to me. You no good snake, she said, pointing a weathered finger at Iron Mike like it was a loaded weapon. This town has survived droughts and floods and winter storms that would freeze the devil himself. We sure as shooting can survive a pack of cowards who prey on decent folks. Iron Mike's face darkened. Old woman, you better. I better nothing, Martha snapped. I've lived in Cedar Falls for 40 years, and I've seen bullies come and go. You're nothing special. Jake's heart nearly stopped. Martha was either the bravest woman in Wyoming Territory or the craziest, and he wasn't sure which would get her killed faster. But her courage seemed to spark something in the other townspeople. One by one, they began stepping out from their hiding places. The blacksmith emerged from his shop with a hammer in his fist. The banker came out carrying an old army rifle. Even Miss Emily appeared at the schoolhouse door, though she thankfully stayed back with the children. Looks like you've got a choice to make, Garrett, Sam said softly. Ride out now, or find out how many graves this town's willing to dig. Iron Mike's eyes moved from face to face, calculating odds. His men were good, but they were used to terrorizing unarmed farmers and shopkeepers, not facing down an entire town that had decided to fight back. You're making a mistake, Hayes, Iron Mike said finally. A big one. Probably, Sam agreed, but it's my mistake to make. The outlaw leader sat his horse for another long moment, his hand hovering over his gun. Jake held his breath, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether Cedar Falls lived or died. Then Iron Mike smiled that cold smile again. Boys, he called to his men, looks like we're going to have to teach this town some manners the hard way. The battle for Cedar Falls was about to begin, and Jake Morrison, son of the town's biggest bully, was about to discover what kind of man he really was. The thunder of galloping horses shook the windows of Cedar Falls like an earthquake. Iron Mike Garrett and his gang of 6 men rode down Main Street with guns already drawn, their faces twisted with the kind of cruelty that comes from years of taking what doesn't belong to them. Sam Hayes crouched behind a wooden water barrel, his heart pounding as he counted the riders through a gap in the boards. "Jake, you see that big one with a scar?" Sam whispered to Deputy Morrison, who was pressed against the wall of the general store across the street. "That's Iron Mike himself. He's mine." The young deputy nodded, sweat beading on his forehead despite the evening chill. This was his first real gunfight, and everyone in town knew it. His father Bull had never taught him how to be brave, only how to be mean. Iron Mike pulled his horse to a stop right in the center of town. His voice boomed like thunder when he shouted, "People of Cedar Falls, we know you got money hiding in that bank. Bring it out nice and peaceful, and nobody has to get hurt today." From her hiding spot behind the blacksmith shop, Martha Caldwell clutched her shawl tighter. She had lived through Indian raids and blizzards that froze cattle solid, but nothing had scared her quite like this. These weren't desperate men looking for food, these were killers who enjoyed their work. Sheriff Bradley stepped out from behind the jail, his badge catching the last rays of sunlight. "You boys picked the wrong town. We don't give up without a fight." What happened next was like watching hell break loose. Iron Mike's men spread out across the street, using horses and buildings for cover, as bullets started flying in every direction. The sound was deafening like firecrackers going off inside a metal bucket. Sam rolled from behind the water barrel and came up firing. His first shot took down a bearded outlaw who was aiming at Sheriff Bradley. The man fell from his horse with a scream that made the other horses rear and dance sideways. "Nice shooting," Jake called out, but his words were lost in the chaos of gunfire and shouting men. The battle moved like a deadly dance through the streets of Cedar Falls. Windows shattered as bullets punched through glass. Wooden signs splintered and fell to the dusty ground. A stray shot set fire to a pile of hay behind the livery stable, sending thick smoke rolling across the battlefield. Iron Mike proved he earned his reputation the hard way. His shots found their targets with scary accuracy. One bullet missed Sam's ear by less than an inch, leaving a burning sensation along his skin. Another shattered the water barrel he had been hiding behind, soaking his boots with cold water. "You're pretty good for a small-town nobody," Iron Mike shouted across the street. "But I've killed better men than you." Sam didn't waste breath on words. He moved like smoke, using every piece of cover the town offered. A rain barrel here, a hitching post there, always moving, always shooting, never staying in one place long enough for Iron Mike to draw a proper bead on him. The tide of battle shifted when Jake Morrison did something nobody expected. The young deputy ran straight across Main Street, dodging bullets like a man running through raindrops. He dove behind an overturned wagon and started picking off outlaws with careful, precise shots. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sam called out during a brief pause in the fighting. "My pa might have been a bully, but he taught me to handle a gun," Jake replied, ejecting empty shells from his weapon. "Said Morrison always knows how to fight." But the fight was far from over. Iron Mike's remaining men had taken positions inside the saloon, turning it into a fortress of broken glass and splintered wood. They were shooting through windows and doors, making it nearly impossible for Sam and Jake to get close. That's when Iron Mike made his biggest mistake. Thinking he had Sam pinned down behind the blacksmith shop, he stepped out into the open street to get a better shot. For just a moment, the most feared outlaw in 3 territories stood exposed in the fading light. Sam saw his chance and took it. His bullet caught Iron Mike in the shoulder, spinning him around like a child's toy. The outlaw's gun flew from his hand and landed in the dust 10 feet away. "Boss is hit!" one of the remaining gang members shouted from inside the saloon. But Iron Mike wasn't finished yet. Clutching his wounded shoulder, he pulled a second gun from his belt, a short-barreled pistol that he kept for close work. Blood was running down his arm, but his eyes still burned with the fire of a man who had never lost a fight. "You got lucky, stranger," Iron Mike snarled, raising the pistol. But luck runs out. The two men faced each other in the dusty street as the sun touched the mountains in the distance. Around them, the gunfight continued. But this moment belonged to just the two of them. Sam could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He could smell the gun smoke and taste the dust in his mouth. Iron Mike's hand was steady despite his wound. Sam could see the man's finger tightening on the trigger, could see death looking at him from the barrel of that gun. Time seemed to slow down like thick honey. and Sam knew that the next few seconds would decide whether he lived to see another sunrise. The sound of their guns firing at the same time echoed off the buildings like one giant thunderclap that shook the entire world. Smoke drifted between the two gunfighters like morning fog over a river. For a heartbeat that felt like forever, neither man moved. Then Iron Mike's knees buckled, and he fell forward into the dust of Main Street. His second gun landed beside him with a dull thud that seemed louder than all the gunfire that had come before. Sam stood perfectly still. His smoking Colt still pointed where Iron Mike had been standing. A thin line of blood trickled down his left arm where the outlaw's bullet had found its mark, but he was alive. More importantly, Iron Mike Garrett would never hurt another innocent person. "It's over," Sheriff Bradley shouted to the remaining outlaws in the saloon. "Your boss is dead. Throw out your guns and come out peaceful." One by one, the surviving gang members stumbled out of the saloon with their hands raised high. They looked at their fallen leader and seemed to shrink like plants in a drought. Without Iron Mike's leadership, they were just ordinary criminals, dangerous, but no longer the unstoppable force that had terrorized 3 territories. Jake Morrison walked over to Sam, his own gun still smoking. The young deputy had a cut on his cheek from flying glass, but his eyes shone with something Sam recognized: the pride that comes from doing the right thing when it matters most. "You saved my life back there," Sam said, nodding toward the overturned wagon where Jake had made his stand. "You saved the whole town," Jake replied. "Guess we make a pretty good team." As the prisoners were led away in chains, Martha Caldwell emerged from her hiding spot behind the blacksmith shop. Her hair was mussed and her dress was dusty, but she moved with the dignity of a woman who had faced down death and lived to tell about it. "Samuel Hayes," she said, reaching up to examine the bullet wound on his arm. "Your mother always said you'd amount to something special. She would have been so proud to see you today." The words hit Sam harder than Iron Mike's bullet. He had spent 20 years trying to prove he was more than the scared boy who had run from Bull Morrison. Today, he had finally proved it, not just to the town, but to himself. Dr. Peterson arrived with his black bag, fussing over Sam's wound like a mother hen. "Bullet went clean through," the old doctor announced. "You'll have a scar to remember this day by, but you'll live to be an old man if you're careful." As the doctor worked, Sam watched Jake organizing the cleanup. The young deputy moved with confidence now, giving orders to the townspeople who were already starting to repair the damage from the gunfight. Windows would be replaced, signs would be repaired, but the real change was something you couldn't see with your eyes. "Jake," Sam called out, "come here a minute." The deputy walked over, pulling off his hat to wipe sweat from his forehead. Up close, Sam could see that Jake had his mother's eyes, kind and honest, nothing like Bull Morrison's cruel gaze. "I've been thinking," Sam said, "this town needs a good sheriff. Sheriff Bradley's getting too old for gunfights, and you've proven yourself today. What do you say?" Jake's eyes went wide. "You mean it? You think I could really do the job?" "Son, I've ridden with some of the best lawmen in the West. You've got what it takes: courage, good judgment, and a steady hand. More importantly, you care about people. That's the most important part." Sheriff Bradley overheard and walked over with a grin. "Been thinking the same thing myself. These old bones are ready for a rocking chair and a fishing pole. What do you say, Jake? Ready to pin on a real sheriff's star?" The ceremony was simple, but meaningful. As the sun set behind the mountains, Jake Morrison raised his right hand and swore to protect and serve the people of Cedar Falls. His voice was strong and clear as he spoke the ancient words that had bound lawmen to their duty since the first settlements. Martha Caldwell had prepared a feast at the boarding house to celebrate their victory. The whole town gathered around tables lit by lanterns and candles, sharing food and stories and laughter. Children who had hidden in root cellars during the gunfight now ran between the tables, playing games and being children again. Sam found himself sitting next to old Pete Hawkins, who had run the livery stable since before Sam was born. Pete's weathered hands shook slightly as he reached for his coffee cup, but his memory was sharp as ever. "Your pa would have been proud too," Pete said quietly. "He was a good man, your father. Died too young, but he left a good son behind." The words surprised Sam. He had barely remembered his father, who had died when Sam was only 7 years old. What was he like? Fair man, honest man. Never backed down from a fight when he was in the right, but never started trouble either. You got his hands quick and sure, but you got your mother's heart willing to forgive even when forgetting ain't possible. As the evening wore on, people began to drift home to their families and their beds. Sam helped Martha clean up the dishes and stack the chairs, working in comfortable silence. Finally, when the last plate was washed and dried, she turned to him with a question in her eyes. "So what now, Samuel? Will you stay in Cedar Falls? Or is the trail calling you again?" Sam looked out the window at the quiet street, where he had faced death and found something better than victory. He had found peace. The scared boy who had run away 20 years ago was finally ready to come home. "I think I'll stay," he said. "Cedar Falls needs a deputy sheriff, and I need a place to belong. Seems like we can help each other." Martha's smile was brighter than all the lanterns in the room. "Your room is ready whenever you want it. I've been keeping it prepared, just in case you ever decided to come home." Later that night, Sam stood on the porch of the boarding house and looked up at the stars scattered across the Wyoming sky like diamonds on black velvet. The same stars had watched over him during 20 years of wandering. But tonight they felt different, not like distant points of light, but like old friends welcoming him home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be other outlaws, other problems, other fights to face. But tonight, Sam Hayes was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by people who cared about him and ready to build something lasting in the place where his story had begun. The West was changing, growing more civilized with each passing year. But some things would never change the value of courage, the power of forgiveness, and the simple truth that home isn't a place you're born, but a place you choose to protect with everything you have.